This is Speaking of Shakespeare, conversations about things Shakespearean. I'm Thomas Dabbs, broadcasting from Aoyama Gakuin University in central Tokyo. If you are joining us on YouTube and wish to listen to this program as a podcast, you may click the link below to your favorite podcast platform. This talk is with Stephen Wittek of Carnegie Mellon University. We will begin with a look at Stephen's new book, Shakespeare and the Cultural Politics of Conversion. We will explore, along with religious conversion, the idea of conversion in human history in relation to Shakespearean theater. We will also consider Stephen's recent collaborative work on Shakespeare and virtual reality. This series is funded with support from the Aoyama Gakuin University Institute of the Humanities, and also with a generous grant from the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science. Stephen, welcome to the program.
Hello, great, very good to be here.
Okay, well, I'm going over your work, and we have in 2022, the first thing we're going to look at is the idea of conversion. And I want to tell our audience at the very beginning that we're going to be talking about conversion in a literary, historical, cultural studies sort of way. And then this conversation will shift to fairly hardcore digital humanities and virtual reality. And you may know Stephen from his work in that area. If you're not interested in conversion, and I can't imagine why you would not be interested in conversion, but if you're not interested in conversion, you can skip. I have in the segments below along the timestamp there, you can skip. But I think you should stay. Anyhow, in 2022, you have the cultural politics of conversion. And also in 2022, you have performing an edition that you did, the cultural politics of conversion. You authored, you edited, and wrote for performing conversion. Also in 2022, Shakespeare VR, that's this year, Shakespeare VR with David McGinnis. That's right. Is that right?
Yes, the great David McGinnis.
The great David McGinnis, and a friend of the program. And Shakespeare VR, another edition about Shakespeare, and very focused on education and teaching. And so, of course, the question is, Stephen, what have you done for us lately? But I wanted to start here with your book. I want you to get right into this idea of conversion. I have just finished reading it, and it is absolutely splendid. It explains so much about Shakespeare and so much other about who we are, actually, about who we are.
Yep. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I hope lots of people read it. It's out there doing its work in the world. Well, I started thinking about conversion almost 10 years ago now. Around 2013, I was a postdoctoral fellow at McGill for Paul Yochnan's Early Modern Conversions Project, which was a big, in Canada, they have a very, very good funding agency, SHRC SHRC. And so Paul got this big grant, and he brought together this remarkable team of scholars. And the basic question at the heart of the project was, what is really going on around conversion in early modernity, more in a cultural sense? It began with the observation that people are talking about conversion across the board in the early modern world, but in many, many, many different ways. They're not necessarily, the discourse around conversion is overlapping, but there's this real proliferation in the period of a deep thinking about conversion and a lot of anxiety around conversion and a lot of sort of very, very productive artistic thinking around conversion as well. So it started there, and Paul's a Shakespearean, of course, as am I, and we had a number of really fantastic Shakespeareans on the project. Thinking about conversion, I don't know if I ever would have thought about it at all if it hadn't been for the project. But over the 10 years, it's really moved to become the center of my scholarly focus.
Yeah, I'm very interested in this because when we say in the, let's just say Western world, when we talk about conversion, we almost immediately go to religious conversion. And that is very much near the center of this. But you talk
Yes.
about it much more on philosophical terms and in much broader terms, that very many points of access into what the idea of conversion is and how it was this moving force, of course, in the 16th century, in the time
Yeah.
of, before and during the time of Shakespeare, but also the notion of, you go back to Pauline conversion, you go to Augustinian
Sure.
conversion, and you mark the 2 points there about the conversion coming to you or whether you come to it, the ambiguity of
Yes.
that at the very beginning of your book. That is sort of the fulcrum kind of on which things turn from the beginning of your book. How is conversion? How does it happen?
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is really the grain of sand in the oyster around conversional conceptualization that gives it its grit and its all the anxiety as well, and its angstiness that makes it so incredibly productive. Beginning, whether it's people using concepts of conversion in a religious sense, as you said, which I mean, I think religious discourse is really certainly around the center or the core. But as you said, it overlaps into many, many different areas. It has a real stake on how people are thinking about new ideas around race. Certainly, it is heavily involved in politics. Thinking about gender, especially marriage. We see this in The Merchant of Venice, of course, with Jessica. So it's really got a foot on all bases, and the more you begin to recognize patterns of conversional conceptualization, the more you begin to see conversional thinking or types of thinking that maybe are adjacent to conversion, or using the structures and tropes and metaphors of conversion. And uh, it's all over the place in
Yeah.
the Shakespearean canon in a way that I had never really thought. Both the word, it's very, very interesting the way Shakespeare uses the word conversion and its cognates. But what my real focus is the ideas and the structures of conversion. How, there's Henry IV, Part One, which is a Reformation story where he's building on chronicle accounts of the great King Henry V, which back when those chronicles that he's drawing on were first printed, it was really, really from black to white, a miraculous conversion story. And I trace in that chapter how the story of the king kind of moves through various forms. And by the time Shakespeare gets a hold of it, it's more a story about a kind of Machiavellian operator who's using ideas about conversion in this very sort of politically acute way, and thinking
Yes.
about the costs and trade-offs.
Yes.
And there's that's that sort of thing in many, many plays, especially the ones
Yes.
I look.
Yes. Well, to give my students and some people a little bit of background here, when you started, you talked about how Paul in the Pauline narrative, Saint Paul or whatever in the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
is struck. Right. He
Mm-hmm.
doesn't ask for it. He intends to do something entirely different, persecute Jews. I'm sorry,
Right.
persecute Christians, converts. And bam, he's hit. In that narrative, in the Augustine narrative, Augustine is begging for conversion, but just
That's
can't
right.
seem to find it, and then sees it. I think there's a bird that sings or something that happens in the Confessions where he says, "This is it." And so,
Here's a voice singing.
yes,
Yeah.
so
Mm-hmm.
we're there, and then let's move to the 16th century. We are in a church that was stable in England, a Roman, what now we would call a Roman Catholic church, but the
Yeah.
Western Roman tradition, very strong in England, much more discord on the continent than in England. And suddenly the king wants to get out of his marriage, and bam, everybody has to convert or else
Bam.
face the
It's like
consequences.
a nuclear bomb is
Eh,
dropped on the country,
Yeah,
culturally speaking,
you
and
just
the
have to.
impact zone goes everywhere. Yeah.
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 And then that goes for a while, and then people need to convert more to the Protestant idea, move further away, and then bam, here comes his daughter, not that long afterwards, really, in history,
Mhm.
and everyone has to convert back to Roman Catholicism or else.
Right.
And then 5 years later, again, boom, you have Elizabeth, and everyone has to be a Protestant again. And it's a whole change of everything in the religious world. You know, you get rid of purgatory, you get rid of so many things in the church and so many ways of worship and so forth. But then that's still so strong when the theaters began, you know, in the 70s. You remarked upon that. And then we move into Shakespeare. It
Yeah.
remains so strong.
I really appreciate that little potted narrative you just gave, with your emphasis on how the pendulum is swinging back and forth. Actually,
Yeah.
very, very often people talk about the English Reformation as though it was just one thing, right? But actually, in the mid 16th century, it was swinging back and forth, and there's just complete chaos
Yeah.
before they kind of get into a more settled period with Elizabeth.
Yeah. And
And
I,
so
I would be
then,
one of those guys. If someone says, listen, Dads, we're going to take you out and tie a rope around your neck and drop you from
Mhm.
a piece of wood, a scaffolding, I would say, listen, show me where the sign.
yeah.
I would be one of those guys. And I think that was probably most, but there were those holdouts, which is
Yes.
probably the reverse, who just wouldn't under any circumstance convert and
Mhm.
paid for it with their lives on all sides of this.
Mhm.
Which they fascinate me. But
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
Stephen Mullaney has this book where he talks especially about the charnel houses, and he invites people to think, you've spent your entire life for generations and generations. There's these bones, and the scholar Mullaney and many other scholars talk about that community of the dead. That these are your family members, and you've got to go and pay your respects and light candles and go through various ceremonies. And there is a felt affective relationship still there and there's all sorts of ceremonies like that, not just but then all of the sudden know that purgatory doesn't exist anymore. We're going to empty out the charnel houses, dump all those bones in the Thames, and all of these
or cart them
ceremonies
up
that
north, cart
put
them
them
up
out
north
north.
to to Finsbury Field, which is a huge
Where those are.
place, right? We don't know where they are, right? Exactly.
Yeah, all of these ceremonies that have been organizing your life is turned upside down. In the church, you can still see today in Shakespeare's home parish, right, where the faces have been effaced, the faces of angels and demons and that sort of thing, and all the iconoclasm is just this tremendous legacy of destruction and left there in an effaced way as a sign of error, right? That
Yeah.
no, where this old Roman Catholicism stuff, this is all in the past now. We're on a new track, and
Yeah.
you've got to fall in line.
Yeah, and you're remarking, and I love the physical, the idea of the Charnel Chapel at Paul's. It's a famous
Yeah.
story of that being destroyed and turned into a bookshop. From bone to book, that
Yes.
conversion, and people just did this, and I guess it probably is evidence of how powerful the powerful were, because
Mhm.
you're just ripping away not only the physical evidence of where their loved ones are. You're ripping away the cosmic thought, the
Mhm.
cosmos, really, because they're supposed to be in purgatory, waiting
Yeah.
salvation, and now there is no. So where are they?
Weighs very heavy. So
Yeah.
so
And
that's
so,
that's one, and I think the Reformation or Reformations is one big organizing paradigm for conversional thinking in the
yeah,
period. But it's by no means the only one, right? There's
yeah.
also the Ottoman Empire is out there,
Oh
where
yeah.
the Catholics. That's sort of okay. That's another branch of Christianity, and is a little. It's very foreign and very scary. But the Ottomans just are completely outside of the Christian paradigm altogether.
Yeah.
Thousands of European Christians, not only from England but across Europe, are Christians are converting to Islam. There's also Judaism is, not a proselytizing religion in the same way that Islam is, but it's uh, uh, causing a lot. There's lots of thinking about the Jews, especially since the Spanish Inquisition,
Yeah.
and not a lot of Jews in England at the time, but certainly a lot of talk about the Jews, whether these Jews who have supposedly convert, whether they actually really can convert. If religion is inherent in the blood, then all
Yeah.
Jews must be dissimulators. But
Yeah.
then there's also this discourse around millenarianism, that there's got to be we must convert the Jews in order to bring on the return of Christ, right? So it's around issues of Judaism. Conversional thinking is really swinging both ways, right?
Yeah.
They can't. Some people are saying they can't possibly convert because it's in the blood. Other people are saying we've got to convert them, right?
Yes.
Um, uh, so again, people often ask me, what is your definition of conversion? What does conversion really mean, right? If it's not only religion, and I think maybe you can say something along the lines of, it's a set of ideas and practices, and it pertains to the ways that an individual might move from one category of identity to the other. But the real answer is that conversion is discourse, that it's moving. It's not just one ideology or one recipe. It's many overlapping ideologies and recipe, and
Yes.
that's, I think, it's all of that again that makes it so productive, and why people are revisiting these are essential, urgent problems in the period, and people are revisiting them again and again and again in many, many different ways. And that's why we see these patterns popping up all over the place. And Shakespeare's theater is a key place, not just only, but the early modern theater is a key place, especially in England, where conversional thinking can play out, because first of all, it speaks not only to literate people. We got to remember, in early modern England, literacy rates are somewhere maybe 10 to, as maybe in London, as high as 20%. But the theater speaks to anybody who has a penny in their pocket and wants to go. And it doesn't speak to them just in a didactic manner, like a sermon, or displays of civic power. Right? The theater doesn't really tell you what to think, especially Shakespeare doesn't.
Oh
He
yeah.
just invites you to the party and says, think, and think very, very deeply about
Yeah.
the most pressing, exciting concerns of the period.
Yeah, well,
Uh,
we've all had that experience of going into a
mhm,
fine theater production, and there is a feeling of conversion because you go from a situation where the fiction so quickly, even with so much physical evidence that this isn't the case in the actual theater, and we're going to talk about
mhm,
virtual theater later, but so much physical evidence, there are people around you, you can see that these people are actors. So quickly, we're drawn into that world,
mhm.
particularly with, excellent actors. And I'm thinking of that great scene everybody's seen, the Kenneth Branagh Christmas Day speech, right? And whether you
Right.
think
In
it's
his
it's
Henry
too
V.
pro-British or too whatever, but
Yeah.
boy, does he do that reflexive thing in that film version where he goes up above, and you can see his troops, which of course are reflective of the groundlings in the state
Mhm,
in the stage, and you see their faces, and those are the faces, right?
yeah.
The actor is Henry at that moment, the great actor, and those people standing there are transformed into this world of, heroic thoughts in this case, right?
Right. What a
And
great
there's that
moment.
magic in there. And
Yeah.
that really bugged some preachers because they wanted that same kind of response and they got it very often
Right.
from their audiences, but they saw that happening in the theater, and they didn't see that going in the right direction. They wanted those audiences for godly reasons, and of course the theater was
Right.
secular. So
It's competition, not always in competition, but certainly, and people are paying to go to the theater, whereas your attendance at church services is mandatory. Your comments about Branagh remind me too. Another aspect of theatrical experience that makes it so conducive to conversional thinking is because an actor can get on stage, You see him one day, he's, maybe he's a Jew. The next day, in a different play, is the same guy's playing Othello or whomever, right?
Yeah.
And on and on. So, or maybe a Catholic priest or whatever. So, one has to at some point think, well, if it's possible for this professional performer to so easily slip from one identity to another and so seamlessly, how do I know that the guy living beside me isn't a crypto Catholic? Or, how do I know when, what this, Jewish guy next door says that he's converted to Christianity? How can you ever know what is in other minds?
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
it's a culture of deep distrust.
Oh,
And
Hamlet
of course,
seems,
yes,
seems, how can
yes,
a villain should look like a villain? How can you
yeah,
smile and still be a villain? Right. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
yes. And, well, this brings up, I want to look more specifically at your book and the kind of case studies that you did.
sure.
Stephen, you're in a field here. You could bring out 3 volumes. This should be a 3-volume work, and I know you felt this when you were constructing it, because
Yes,
there's so much that you bring out, and then there's the other stuff. Let's talk about where you focus. You start out with shrew, and
yeah,
the taming of the shrew, and there is that very famous conversion scene where you don't uh, begin. You begin with the beginning and
hmm
Petruchio, and bring out these marvelous, just marvelous readings of the whole transformational or conversional, let's say, conversional qualities of that play. And then you move through several other plays and bring out some things that I really have, in many cases, never have thought about.
yeah. Well, you're quite right. First of all, that I left a lot on. Maybe there's several more volumes to come. I had originally envisioned a book about early modern drama and conversion, and had done all this work. And at some point, one of my readers said, you really, you got to hone this down. There's also been Lee Costelling has an excellent book on early modern drama and conversion too,
Right.
as well. But yeah. So maybe there's further ones to come, and I kind of took the advantage of focusing just on Shakespeare. But you were asking about the Taming of the Shrew, and so yeah. So the idea there, it's maybe I wanted to go chronologically. If maybe it wasn't the best one to start of, because it's a little bit of it's not the most obvious case to present as a conversion play. But what I say in that chapter is, again, the focus is not so much representations of religious conversion, right? It's conversional thinking, and how Shakespeare is bringing conversional thinking into the domestic sphere and into a domestic paradigm. So there's all sorts of debates going on at the time. What do you do? What's the best way to control an unruly wife and an unruly woman, right?
Yes.
And Erasmus has written on that, and there's a whole tradition of shrew taming
Yeah.
stories and ballads, often very, very grisly, and people recommending, well, if you have an unruly wife, what you got to do is, and people say this in a very kind of rollicking, jovial, joyous way. You've got to torture her and beat her to death into submission. There's that famous ballad, "A Wife Wrapped in Laurel Skin for Her Bad Behavior," where the solution to taming the shrew is to he whips her and then he wraps her in the skin of a dead horse that's salted, and that's so. And on the other side of this debate, what do you do with an unruly wife? There's people more in the humanist tradition, like Erasmus, who are saying no. Violence, that kind of hard physical violence is not really the right way. And their argument isn't just because it's cruel. Their argument is more that which we wish that was their argument, but
Yeah.
their argument really is it doesn't work as well. It's not as, and the humanists in that tradition are suggesting a softer, more kind of psychological approach where you kind of play these coercive games, sort of. So instead of whipping, things maybe like starvation, which of course is not a game, but it's seen as an alternative.
Yeah.
And Shakespeare seems to be recommending something along those lines, like instead of outright physical violence. And it's caught up with then very, very often in especially in the humanist discourse, it's caught up with this spiritual framework as well. That really what you've got to do, teaching your wife how to behave properly
Mm-hmm.
is of a piece with a husband's responsibility to give his wife spiritual guidance as well. So
Yeah.
it is really what they're recommending is a conversional program. And that's something like what Katerina goes through in The Taming of the Shrew.
Right.
But Shakespeare, of course, doesn't leave it there. I mean, he's not one, as I said, just to sort of didactically recommend a certain program, because the ending of The Taming of the Shrew, we get this, Katerina gives this remarkable speech that's conspicuously intense. And in a way where it is not clear whether she's just sort of saying what she thinks she needs to say to get by, or if she's exercising irony as a way of kind of getting in touch with some sort of agency. And so the question is left open, I think, at the end.
Yeah.
How the same question is being asked that Shakespeare asks again and again and again. How do you know that somebody has really changed who says that they have changed?
Well,
How do
yeah,
you know
and
that somebody is really converted?
yeah, and I've seen this in several cases, particularly with comedy, that you're left unsettled, even if, yeah, we're told it's a
Yes.
happy ending, everything is resolved. But if you
Mhm.
played it just straight that Kate is converted or Catherine is converted completely, right? Then
Mhm.
that begs the question of what this really is. What is this thing? This was
Yeah.
obviously forced. This was that she has no real choice in this, and it worked. And
Yeah.
that's very unsettling too, right? That
Yeah.
you absolutely do adopt the persona that you're forced to adopt and the belief that you're forced to adopt. That's very unsettling.
Yeah. And I mean, people, it's a classic undergrad essay question. Was Katerina really tamed?
Yeah.
And I think in performances to this day, people leave the theater debating that question.
Yeah.
And we know, as far back as we know the performance history of the play, that's been the case. And I have very little doubt that members of Shakespeare's own audience, fell on both sides of that question and everywhere in between. That
Yeah.
again, the idea there is not so much to feed you the answers, but to get you asking the questions. I
Yeah.
think that's the
Yeah.
case.
And you go through several plays. I'm going to let our viewers read the book. We can't
Uh,
because all of these, every chapter has what it says, and then all of the places that it goes. What I love about your book is that it prompts you to think about what you have written about, and you bring in so much excellent historical background and recordings. And of course, you have a history of this from your newsprint. We'll get to in a moment, talking about the early news industry in the period and how the theater was reflective of that. But these theater productions and even the religious transformations, all of this stuff didn't happen in a vacuum, of course.
mhm.
And so I want to move to the end of the book and then kind of move on to some other things. But you do end, I think, appropriately with the Tempest, and that's where you get away from primarily kind of well, no, you do all the way through, but the Tempest is much more about a political structure than it
Yeah.
is about a religious, even though they are very intermixed. And of course, based on we pretty much agree, don't we agree that it's based on that account of the Jamestown expedition and that sort of thing. Yeah,
Strachi's
Strachey's.
report of the wreck.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, that's
I like the
uh,
idea. So
yeah.
yeah,
It's definitely one of the flavors in the stew. I think we can say without
yeah, yeah,
any controversy.
yeah.
Yeah, or even to lift it to where, I mean, there's all sorts of disagreement about the scholarly disagreement about sources for the Tempest, but certainly Shakespeare is influenced and excited about stories coming in from the New World. I think we, can
Oh,
although some people might deny that as well too, but it's clear to me that
oh, come on.
what's
Of
going on.
course you
Yeah,
would be. Of
yeah,
course
yeah.
you, how could you not be?
Yeah, how could they not be? But yeah, so in the chapter on the Tempest, what I really focused down on is uh, some material that scholars haven't looked at very much in Tempest criticism so far, and that is the series of propagandistic texts and speeches and sermons that were coming out in a very narrow timeline, around 1609 to 1610. And these are mostly preachers producing these texts and sermons. But the key point is that they are paid by the Virginia Company. And actually, sometimes they're paid in cash and sometimes they're paid in stock options, right? So around this time, the Virginia Company is still the idea of establishing a colony in the New World is kind of a crazy thing to want to do. These are a little bit like penny stock promoters. There's no guarantee that an English colony in the New World is going to bring back money. It looks like this time like a real dog. So around the time Shakespeare is writing The Tempest, the Virginia Company is in lots of trouble. There's a lot of public criticism over the idea of initiating a colony in the New World. It by no means at this point is clear that anybody's going to make any money. There are also lots of ethical concerns about whether it's the proper thing to do to go and, there are people living in the New World. Do we want to go and take over somebody else's country? And a lot of the same people who are involved in colonial ventures in England are the same people who had been organizing the colonial ventures in Ireland. So there's an important connection there.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, in 1609, 1610, then, instead of making the argument, hey, give us money, invest in the company, we're going to make millions and millions of dollars, or pounds, all of a sudden the argument is, you have an obligation here. The voyage is not about making money. What we're doing in the New World is we're going to go convert the heathen, all this othering. We've got this obligation to go and do this. So now, and just for a short period of time, those sorts of arguments come back again when the Virginia Company is in trouble again in the 1620s. So they sort of pop up 1609, 1610, then they go away for a while and they come back. But and all these people who are making this argument are paid propagandists, I think is a key point to remember here. That they are being paid either in cash or sometimes in stock options as part of in the company itself, and they're only making these sorts of arguments, at times when the Virginia Company is in trouble. So on the face of it, at least to the public, it seems clear, and certainly to people like Shakespeare and Ben Jonson, this looks like a very sort of opportunistic kind of argument to make, all of a sudden using conversion as a justification for colonial enterprise.
Yes.
And so Shakespeare's bringing that conversation into the play.
Yes. There are intersections in this, and I want to talk about this because I know that you did your work at McGill, and I was there about a decade ago for a conference on Paul's Cross Churchyard.
All right, with Torrance Kirby,
with
right?
Torrance
My
Kirby,
old
and
buddy.
I wanted
Hello,
to bring
Torrance.
Hello, Torrance. Yeah. My goodness,
Yeah.
It's been a long time. And also so many other people. I can't begin naming them because I would leave out someone and that would be rude. But we, at that same time, I remember Susan Wabuda of Fordham talking to me about conversion. And she was going to get involved. And I think it's exactly the beginnings, because I think it was 2012. So you started in 2013 with the conversion project.
Right. Well, we had, it was there was sort of a little mini project before the big project. But yeah, right around 2013, that's when everything was beginning. And Torrance was certainly on board right from the very first days.
That's the intersection between Reformation studies, religious studies, and theater. And honestly, I found much more receptiveness on the Reformation, on the theologian side. They love it when theater people come in. right? And I found in certain quarters, not certainly not all, but in certain quarters,
Yeah,
theater is theater and the religion is over there, you know.
yeah.
And I love that intersecting. And also, I love it that, and we're going to kind of segue from your book to your edition
Hmm.
and the Spanish connection. You're at Carnegie Mellon now, but at
Yeah,
McGill, you're working with people who are experts in the history of the Spanish conversional efforts and theater
right.
from Madrid to Mallorca, the island there with the Jewish conversion. If you could tell us a little bit about that project, I love the Spanish connection there. Because I don't think that's made enough in terms of our dramatic focus on Shakespeare. There's a huge connection there too, and
Right.
intersection.
So the scholar, I mean, there were people, all sorts of early modern scholars involved in the early modern conversions project, but the person you're speaking about is my co-editor for Performing Conversions. Here it
That's
is
right.
here, Jose Clev Martin,
Yeah.
who is a scholar of, well, early modern everything. He's a very, very learned man, but especially focuses on the Hispanic world. And so we put together this book. This was before I wrote my book on Shakespearean conversion.
Yeah.
I started it while I was doing my postdoc, and we brought in mostly scholars who were working on the conversions project. And part of it, we started off thinking about cities and theater and civic different forms of civic theatricality.
Yes.
And I had been thinking about cities for a long time. I still think a lot about early modern London and how the conditions of an emerging cosmopolitanism and urbanity, how that gives birth to the theater in a lot of ways. And cities are always really, really unique in terms of theater because often, of course, as one might expect, they're kind of at the avant-garde of the most sophisticated technologies and developing a commercial theatrical tradition. And I had always sort of felt, I've been a Shakespearean, and as they always say, the more you learn, the less you feel you know. And I began to realize, oh, what else is going on? There's in other countries in early modern Europe. I know so much specifically about early modern London, but I have a sense of people like, Lope de Vega and other dramatists and dramatic traditions out there. So I just wanted to learn. And so we brought in scholars, and the idea was, the basic question as we set out to make the edition is what is the relationship between cities and various forms of theater in early modernity? And we ended up, the book turned out really nice. So, I mean, we never set out to cover every single city.
No.
But we've got chapters from on Venice from Ian Fenlon. There's two chapters. Paul Yachnin and I both write about early modern London. There's a chapter on early modern Amsterdam and Mexico City and Madrid and Bern and Lucerne and many different cities in Switzerland. So it sort of brings all those together and looks at different ways that theater and or sort of theatrical thinking, I guess, in some cases, is intersecting with processes and of conversion and conversional thinking.
Yeah, well, and also what I drew from my reading, I haven't read everyone's article yet, but
Mm-hmm.
I focused on Madrid. I'm very interested in Spain and
Mm-hmm.
also some other. But you have the Holy Roman Empire out there,
Mm-hmm.
and in our imagination, Shakespeare is big, and that whole theater is big. If you look at the entire publishing industry, the European published industry was gigantic compared to this small enterprise on this
Yes.
island, just over there.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
yet, that said, I have trouble in the 16th century finding what you point out, what, of course, Andrew Gurr and others have pointed out. I have trouble finding that explosion of integrated audiences and commercial playhouses that happened really almost 20 years, if not 20 years before Shakespeare really came on the scene. Uh,
Yeah.
and that Shakespeare was just kind of walking into this infrastructure of city theaters that had already
Hmm.
been established. And then, of course, Marlowe and Kidd and all these guys, it just obviously kind of exploded again there,
Yeah,
at least
yeah,
in publishing and so forth. They were great playwrights before, but we don't know enough about them. Anyhow, I don't see that kind of example mirrored in on the continent. And
yeah,
it might be a religious a reason, in my mind, what you're talking about, pulling people pulling a people apart, putting them back together again cosmically, and even geophysically in how they worship and that sort of thing, may have made London the city for the premier city for the public commercial theater and the
yeah,
integrated
yeah.
audiences.
It is true. I'm biased, of course. I do think what's going on in London theatrically, that in terms of theater, is kind of special.
Yeah.
And it's very, very different. I mean, of all those other European cities, I think people who know more about Spain maybe can correct me, but Spain kind of comes closest to England.
Yeah.
Certainly, what's going on in France completely different, and
Yeah. Yeah.
Switzerland, very, very, very different again. And Mexico City, of course, in the New World is a whole other, very, very interesting in terms of conversion, but a whole other tradition as well. And London is a unique city itself. It's, as I think you're quite right to just sort of remind listeners, at this point in history, England is not the big economic superpower. We're still well ahead of the age of empire. It's this weird little island country up there that all of a sudden starts packing a big punch, partly, in terms of trade. And but London becomes the biggest city in Europe in Shakespeare's day, and
Yeah.
it's a really, really important trade. But it's not yet a big imperial power. It's still a tiny, rather insignificant country in comparison to Spain and Rome, and of course the Ottomans. But tourists, one of the things, if you're a tourist coming to England, that we know was probably one of the main attractions, just as you would go to see the Eiffel Tower today if you went to France, or the Empire State Building if you were in the Statue of Liberty if you go to New York. Tourists traveling to early modern England, one of the things on the itinerary is always the theater, right?
Yeah.
And that's actually a lot of what we know about the theater comes from tourists like Thomas Platter and all those wonderful drawings, people writing about it. So I think unique is the right word for
Yes.
what's going on in early modern England.
Yes. Oh, okay. Stephen, I could talk with you about this. I really, I mean, the cows never come home, right? Until the cows come
Right.
home.
Right.
But it's about that long. I don't think that,
Yeah.
I think that it is without ending, because we
Yeah.
haven't even gotten to, and I'm going to encourage you, because I'm not going
Hmm.
to do it.
Right.
There's the whole love thing, and the conversion and the parallel. I'm thinking of Benedict talking of Claudio, and he said, "Can I be so converted?" And that kind of
Yes.
and that equivalency of religious conversion to
Hmm.
it's strong in Romeo and Juliet too. Just
Yes.
and Midsummer Night's Dream and the whole power. We need to talk a little bit of Ovid. We actually, before we get out of this, we have to, because there you
Okay.
have that. We've been talking a lot about the religious strain, which was strong and probably
Yes.
predominant, but there's Ovid right there, and
Hmm.
not just Shakespeare. Ovid is seemingly, from my research, at the core of the London theater of this time, and
Yes.
metamorphosis is right there.
And he lives in Shakespeare's imagination. He owns a lot of real
Just
estate in Shakespeare's imagination.
absolutely, yes.
Uh-huh. Yes. To back up just a second to the line that you were just quoting, could I be so converted? It really is a great line. I mean, I don't write about that play in the book, but it's certainly, I mentioned it in the introduction a little bit.
Yeah.
And that line in particular is really indicative of how Shakespeare is thinking and using the term conversion. That's a line about love and being converted by love. And almost I don't know the exact stats off the top of my head, but very, very, very often when Shakespeare's speaking about or writing about conversion, Shakespearean characters are writing about conversion. it has some sort of affective dimension like that. It's almost never, conversion as in going from Protestantism to Catholicism. It's always, love converted into hate, or hate converted into love, or shame converted into joy, and that sort of thing, especially in the sonnets. It's really, really interesting to me. On Ovid, I'll give a shout out. This book, Performing Conversion, came out in the series from Edinburgh University Press, the Conversion series, and it was the second installment. The first installment was a collection of essays called it's Ovidian transversions, in connection to not just theatrical representations of conversion, but Ovid across the board in early modernity. It's well worth checking out. And the editors are Valerie Trobe at the University of Michigan, Patricia Badir, and Peggy McCracken.
Yeah, this is a kind of parallel field. And even in Shakespeare's time, I think it was, considered there was the, well, of course, Arthur Golding was the translator, the brilliant translator of Ovid. And I think he was a solid Presbyterian. He was doing it for moral religion. It was considered moral instruction for young boys, part of their religious training. And boy, that backfired, didn't it?
Isn't that remarkable? I was just thinking about this today. I was giving a lecture on the tragedy of Miriam, and talking about how, as part of the new kind of humanist education for middle-class students, how often they would do translations and performances too, sometimes, of the literature of classical antiquity. And reading, because Ovid is hot, white hot, racy stuff.
Yes.
And Seneca too is the other one. Is also a tremendous influence on Kyd and Shakespeare and Marlowe and all of those guys. And is, really Ovid and Seneca. You don't get early modern drama in its, as we know it and love it in England, without Ovid and Seneca. They're just absolutely fundamental. And I think a lot of it comes from, when they're, between the ages of 10 and 16. That's what they're studying. And in Shakespeare's case, it seems almost obsessively, it's almost as though he can't help himself but allude to Ovid again and again and again. And of course, the Metamorphosis, the great theme is transformation and change, which maps very, very nicely onto conversional thinking. And it's especially in terms of Shakespeare's focus on the conversionality of emotion too, and the importance of emotion in conversional representation.
Absolutely. And well, okay, so we're going to have to move on, because we have some viewers here who are interested in your VR project. Again, this is just endless. I mean, it's so exciting for me. You know how we still feel like we have been in bubbles from the COVID-19. It's called Corona here, and I think in Spain too. The COVID-19 pandemic has still put us into bubbles, and it's still not, we don't feel quite out of them yet. We haven't been able to go to the conferences that we were accustomed to going to. I met you at the Digitizing the Stage conference a few years ago. And in my case, being in Japan, you feel isolated when you don't go to conferences outside, because those are the wonderful, rich times you get to talk with people in the hallways, like you're doing now. But the VR project,
I haven't been to a conference either yet.
You haven't been to
not well, there's lots of stuff on Zoom, but that's I kind of have a love-hate relationship with Zoom. It's anyway, it's not exactly the same.
Yeah, it's better than nothing,
Yes.
And so, and it's a lot better than nothing. It is a lot better than nothing. And it's also kept me in touch with so many other people, but the virtual, this is a good segue, in the sense that we are not experiencing the VR experience that you have set up, with the headphones and so forth. We are a kind of flat two-dimensional world in Zoom, although it's a lot better than things used to be. And so you are moving in your research at Carnegie Mellon, and in conjunction with several theaters, there's it's the Blackfriars Theater in Virginia, that theater,
Yes,
and
that was my partner to start out with. Yes.
yeah, and the folks at Waterloo, I think, are, or at least at the Stratford, Ontario, is what's the connection?
Well, one of the contributors to the volume that David McInnes and I put together on Shakespeare and virtual reality is Jennifer Robert Smith, who's at
Yeah.
Waterloo. So she's doing stuff. That's Jennifer's project, not mine.
Okay, well,
But
let me just say the title here. This is a 2022, a very recent book, Shakespeare VR. There it is, with David McGinnis, who is just one of the finest people in the world, along with you.
I agree.
And he's just wonderful and does such wonderful work. But along with you, be, let's talk about that
I've got
VR
new
project.
things cooking up too, where I just got an email from David, because when we finished this volume, I sent him an email. I said, David, I love working with you so much. What's next? Let's keep on going. And sure enough, a few months later, he's got more tricks up his sleeve. So stay
You
tuned.
guys, I don't know what
The
you're
Wittek
doing.
McInnes collaboration will continue.
And for our viewers, this is a collaboration between Melbourne, Australia, the University of Melbourne, and Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, USA. And so that's one of the great advantages of living in our time, and it's just going to get better, is that this is possible. I mean, I remember when this would have to be done by correspondence, and it would be almost impossible considering the energy level, maybe over a longer period of time, but you guys can work together and talk to each other, face to face, so to speak. But the VR project, we talked about it when I spoke with David a little over a year ago, and things have advanced there. And let's talk about that, the book itself, and also the project at Carnegie Mellon and the collaborations that you're doing with various theaters around the world.
Sure. So, I arrived at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh in 2017, and here they have a part of the university called the Entertainment Technology Center, where they do video game production and also virtual reality production. And I've always sort of had an interest, I've got a foot in the digital humanities and, been good with computers. And virtual reality at that point was on my radar. I had experienced a few different things with virtual reality, but not too much. But I already had in the back of my mind this idea is, I know it's only going to be a matter of 1 or 2 years before I go to the SAA, Shakespeare Association of America conference, and somebody's going to be there in the digital exhibit, which I've done a few times, with a Shakespearean virtual reality project. It's just preordained. It's definitely going to happen because virtual reality, and I'm speaking here of virtual reality headsets where you get a 360-degree picture around. So anywhere you turn, it gives you a simulation of being in a space. So virtual reality is so much to do with spatiality. And so much of my work and so much of work that I admire in Shakespeare studies is about spatiality as well, the space of the theater, and what that is like, and how that is influencing one's understanding of the meaning of Shakespearean drama, how Shakespeare really writes that space of the Blackfriars and the Globe and conditions of performance into his plays, that it really matters that there's full illumination of the audience. The proximity really matters. The acoustics matter. That to create that sense of interactivity. And that's been a part of my lectures on the theater in my teaching for a long time. So anyway, so I arrived at this university where they've got this center where they're developing virtual reality, and I thought to myself, one of the first things I want to do is make friends with the people who make this and see if I can maybe I'm the guy who makes a Shakespearean virtual reality project. And so I got a small grant which was actually, I thought I was, I got a $10,000 grant, which I thought was, wow, I can do anything now. I very quickly learned that's not a lot of money
No.
when you're doing virtual reality. That's very little. But I did make some friends with Ralph Fatuccio, who is one of the instructors at ETC, and also with one of Ralph's students, Jae-hee Cho, who is from South Korea. And I think Jae-hee's a real genius at a technical genius, but also this sort of a visionary in terms of thinking about what virtual reality can do. He had done a number of other projects on, his whole thing was he wants to raise it above just, oh, I'm on a roller coaster or I'm shooting zombies. And he really wants to do some more interesting emotional and artistic things with the form. So he's done projects on underwater divers off the coast of South Korea, a project on racial discrimination. What does it feel to be a person of color? You're sort of put into somebody else's body, and how, and all that. So he did a thing on the Holocaust where he takes you through the camps and everything, and actually like shows you all very, very sort of serious work. So I got together with him. The other with Ralph and Jae-hee. The other great collaborator that I was lucky to hook up with was Sarah Enlow and Ethan McSweeney, who were at the Blackfriars, the reconstruction of the Blackfriars Theater in Stanton, Virginia. Were part of the American Shakespeare Center.
Yes.
Which have you been there?
I have never been there. Don't tell them.
It is.
I'm dying to go.
Well, you can go there in virtual reality.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so
it was really a labor of love, started by Ralph Cohen, and the community all chipped in to build, and working off the historical work of people like Andrew Gurr, and made this beautiful theater. When you walk in, it's like the feeling that I got when I went to the Blue Mosque in Turkey for the first time. It's just, not that it's not a sacred space, but it has that sense of sacredness in it. And it's so much fun to go and see plays. The same is true, of course, of the Globe reconstruction in London and the new Sam Wanamaker, which is another reconstruction of the Blackfriars as well. It's really, there's nothing like I would just go and see anything in those spaces. They're so much fun. So I, had my team, and we went down because of Jae-hee's reputation. We were able to borrow a very expensive virtual reality camera from Google. It's like I think a $20,000 machine. Looks like the Death Droid from Star Wars.
Yeah.
And we shot a few scenes from Hamlet, and we also made about a 5-minute documentary about just the Blackfriars Theater. And the idea here is, the idea is not to replace theatrical experience, because I don't think there's any, replacement for any substitution. But to give students just a little taste of what it's like to be in one of these theaters, so that when they're reading the plays, they can understand this isn't just a text. You can't read a play the same way you read a novel or a poem, because the real life and energy of a play comes out in the theater, or a big part of it, right? It's sometimes a little bit like, just reading the musical score without being able to hear the music. And so the idea is to give students some sense of what that space is like, so that when they're reading the play, they can, kind of understand it in terms of spatiality of the theater. So that was the first project. That was 2018. And I've got the new one coming that's just out now too as well.
Well, you guys have so much energy. I spoke with James Shapiro almost a year ago, and
cool.
We are of a certain age where we've figured out that we overlapped. We both were in London and going to West End plays back in another century. And we both agreed, I think, on camera and off, that was a conversional experience. Of any way you want to define it. It took some kid from Brooklyn, New York, who grew up in this neighborhood, and another kid from a country crossroads in South Carolina. And
Hmm.
instead of doing whatever we were probably born to do, whatever,
Uh-huh.
we went into
Uh-huh.
Shakespeare studies. It
Right.
completely changed our lives. This experience of going to these plays, and also going up the road and seeing plays at Stratford and Aldwych, all these theaters. And
Yeah, same
yet,
here. I
as that child, I could participate in band and orchestra. There were
Mhm.
ways to create that space and to be a musician, right? But there was a little theater in our town with some amateur performances that were quite well done but we didn't have that. And there's so many kids, and even if you start thinking about all over the globe, who really don't have the opportunity to experience the theater in the way that you can in the West End, going to these theaters, or you can in Stratford, Ontario, as well as the Stratford upon Avon,
sure.
or at the Blackfriars in Staunton, Virginia. Uh, they're just that this is a way to bring Shakespeare to kids, and and I know that, that if you try to teach a play that begins, "Who's there?"
Right.
you don't, you're nowhere close to the physical space where this is happening. These are people who are frightened, right? And if you
Yeah.
don't, so a teacher who gives out Hamlet, okay, start reading, you're going to lose some people right off the bat. And so the
Yeah.
idea that you could bring in a headset, and these headsets will become smaller and smaller. I don't know. There'll be something we can attach to our glasses
They
at some
already
point.
they've
Yeah.
just released a new headset that is, I haven't tried it yet, but Meta has, they're getting lighter and can do more and more things.
And they're cheaper
Uh,
now too. And you can
yes.
send them, and they can become part of instruction in schools for kids who don't have access to these theater venues that we're talking about.
Yes, libraries are buying them. I get emails from librarians and instructors fairly frequently now, looking for educational. Our project is essentially an education, a very
Yes,
humble
yes.
education project. Um, but instructors and librarians saying, "Hey, we just have invested, in 20 of these new headsets. What can we do with them? How do we bring them into the classroom?" So I think you're right. I mean, it's not a replacement for going to the theater itself, but the idea is it gives you just a small taste. Let me say a few words about the new experience that we got a much bigger grant after doing that first project at the Blackfriars from the National Endowment of the Humanities. And we've just completed over the summer a new prototype based on Romeo and Juliet. And what we did this time, instead, with the first time when we were at the Blackfriars, we were shooting photorealistic imagery. And the thing is, when you do that, you can look around and get the sense that you're in the theater, but you can't actually walk around and move
Hmm.
around.
Hmm.
So what we wanted to do with this next more ambitious phase is to make a digital recreation of the theater. So something more along the lines of a video game where you can actually move around and get a sense. And so there's an audience there. And even more importantly, to sort of heighten the sense of interactivity, to give students a sense of what it's like to actually be a performer in that space. So it works a little bit like karaoke, where you choose a role. You want to be Romeo, or do you want to be Juliet? And then there you are. You're on the Blackfriars stage,
Yeah.
and you're Romeo, and you're looking up at the balcony, and there's Juliet, and your lines appear as they would in karaoke, and
Yeah.
you read them, and then Juliet responds to you. So you get a sense as though you're performing. I mean, it's right now. It's in the prototype that we just put out. It's called Sweet Sorrow. It's a little bit like talking to animatronic Abe Lincoln at Disneyland. We had very, very good actors doing the recording for us, so it kind of gives you a little bit anyway. Where I think there's still a long ways to go, but when it's really, really working, and when you're really putting your heart into the performance, you do get that sense that you're interacting. Or a little bit of that sense that you're interacting with another actor, and people are watching you, or you're on the stage. It still takes a lot of imaginative engagement, as theatrical spectatorship
Yes.
always does.
Yes.
But it's lots of fun. We've demoed it now for a few students, and especially I think our drama students here at Carnegie Mellon have really sort of responded very enthusiastically.
Yeah.
Kind of got to be a little bit of a ham, a born
Yeah.
performer. It takes people out of their comfort zones, but anyway, it's available, and please, it's free too. Like all of the stuff that we put out is 100% free. And there's lesson plans on the websites and worksheets for teachers who are thinking about ways to incorporate the material into their classroom.
Yeah. Well, of course they're going to be, and they may be right. There's some doomsday predictions, because the students you have now, when they get older, they're going to be the old fogies who didn't grow up, kind of like I'm the old fogey who did not grow up with a smartphone, right? And
Right.
They're going to be the old fogies who didn't grow up in the virtual reality worlds, and we can imagine
Right.
the ugly turns that's invariably going to take.
Yeah.
And that sort of, but it's coming whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
And also it has already come in many ways. I mean, the Apollo astronauts 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago, were training in simulators, and those things are quite advanced now. And
Yeah.
this is just a natural progress of tech. It's the unnatural progress but the inevitable progress of technology. And
I do have that sense too, that we're really at the beginning of something. I think the jury is still out as exactly what the influence of virtual reality is going to be. There is a long history, as you know, in Shakespeare studies and teaching. Whatever the next new thing is, it always finds its way into Shakespeare studies. This is true with theory as well. Like Shakespeare
yes,
studies
of
is often the
course.
first place to sort of digest this stuff.
Yes.
David, I think, is very, very much on this page too. We've tried to avoid the trap of technological utopianism and saying, "Oh, this is going to blow the roof off and change the way."
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's clear that, like as you just said, it's here, and people are starting to experiment. But I always say I feel very, very much with virtual reality as though we're at the stage where people were more than 100 years ago now, with early days of silent film,
Yeah.
where you've probably seen those old films of Sir Herbert Bourbon-Tree did of King John, right? Where the camera is completely stationary. It's basically, that's almost where we're at. And like, look where film went over the
Oh my.
intervening 100
Yeah.
years,
And this
right?
will be more
Ago.
accelerated. This will be more accelerated because the technology is there.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of it really is a kind of hardware question now, I think. There's a lot of programming too that has to be done, but
Yeah.
the infrastructure
And
is
our artistic work, I think,
the
that
artistic
has
work.
to go. That I think is key to me. It's actually, I think technology right now is way ahead of where artistic imagination is in terms of
Yeah.
virtual reality.
Yeah.
It's, again, to make the analogy to film. I don't think we're at the stage. Film jumps 1,000 feet forward when they start developing editing techniques, right? I
Yeah.
don't think that's and you start to get those early black and white silent masterpieces.
Yeah.
We're not even there yet.
Yeah.
We're still
Well,
kind of at very, very much roller coasters and shooting zombies for the most part.
but the where we've reached though is we've merged what seem to be diametrically opposed things:
Mhm.
conversion, highly literary stuff that you're doing, and the high tech stuff that you're doing. All of this plays into conversion. There will be a conversion. with virtual reality, just as there was with the book. I mean, you could blame the Reformation on the book, on movable type, on pamphlets, and you do a lot of stuff. And we're going to do go back to your media stuff in just a moment.
Oh,
But
sure.
how far do we go back? Fire, we
Mhm.
we figured that out somewhere back
Right,
then, and that changed a lot of things for good and for bad.
right.
The thing is, yeah, book and then movie and radio, all the wonderful things that radio did in terms of being able to bring people together. I remember my father saying, moving from South Carolina, he was in the Army and he went to San Francisco and he was talking with a guy at a bar. And the guy said, you seem like a nice guy, but I can't understand half of what you're saying to me. And he said,
Really?
that's interesting you said so. I can't understand you much. And the dialects were that different. And
Hmm.
so you could say, okay, radio did that. But then again, you could blame maybe the Third Reich. I think it's been done on radio. You need that
Right.
kind of ability to broadcast your message and that sort of thing. So the good will come with the bad and vice versa.
Or think, surely there's the introduction of radio, and then a few decades later, the introduction of television,
Yeah.
and then you get things like the civil rights movement and these
Uh-huh.
huge cultural changes
Well,
that are
yeah,
in
without those,
in
that
very,
film,
very
that
many ways
footage,
conditioned.
yeah, that I remember, the footage in Selma, that,
Mhm.
you could almost say that did it, that and a few other things. And the,
That's public making. That's public making
yeah,
right
that
there.
assassination of the guy in Vietnam, the boom, on television in black and white. But these are conversional experiences. This is when you go from one state to another, where you suddenly are thinking, well, the war is okay, but no, now it's not okay. The things aren't that bad in the South. Oh, yes, they are.
Mhm.
And people who have to shift their whole way of thinking about a certain that's the conversion, and sometimes the conversion goes dark, maybe Third Reich or whatnot,
Mhm.
but so often it's the technology that pushes the conversion from the book, from anything, from movable type to virtual reality. But you talk a lot about news and the reflexivity on the stage of news and this going back not that far. This in our view, this is still a recent book. Your work on
Mhm. Oh,
media
here it
in
is here.
Shakespeare. Yeah, there
I've
we
got
are.
them all.
Yeah, the
I
media
should have had
players.
them back here or something.
Let's talk about that a bit before we finish.
Sure. Well, way back in another life, I started off in my academic career as a journalism student, and had been always interested in media theory and media studies, and worked as a freelance journalist for a while. When I was doing my PhD, I started to get interested in the history of news. And I started to put together the pieces in early modern England. News in some ways has, always has existed as long as there's been civilization. But the emergence of a commercial industry for the publication of printed news texts starts coincidentally, or my argument is not coincidentally, right around the same time as the emergence of a theatrical commercial or commercial theater or theatrical industry. Same, almost identical trajectories, kind of give or take 10 years. Um, so my argument in the media players is this is by no means coincidental. It has a lot to do with the emergence and the growth of early modern London and the emergence of luxury commodities such as news and theater. And in fact, these are not opposite, but they're trajectories of growth, but they're very, very intertwined. And there's sort of a process of co-evolution going on. And the theater is not always recognized how much theater is not only just mirroring what's going on in the news, it's picking up on topical discourse, but it's also actively involved in helping to make a public built around interest in topical news and topical stories. So they're very, very closely intertwined, theater and news. In both cases, what's really going on, I mean, it's not all that's going on, but a part of what's going on is people are selling access to public conversation and making a public. So that's the argument, and that's sort of the starting point. And I look, of course, a big figure in this respect is Ben Jonson, and I look very closely at his play, The Staple of News. I write in the book that Jonson maybe I think can be considered the great granddaddy, or maybe the first real media critic. And what I mean by that is, again, he's not just bringing what's on the front pages into the theater, although he's partly doing that. But he's also acting a little bit like guys like Jon Stewart or Saturday Night Live, where there's an actual media critique going on, especially in not only the staple news, but especially the staple of news. He's thinking about, Jonson has such a great appreciation of sort of the social scene in early modern London. He's thinking like, okay, there's, just like you were just talking about virtual reality, right? There's this new thing. Is it good? Is it bad? He's kind of making fun of it in some ways, but he's also extolling, and kind of looking forward into the future, like how is this going to change society, and really doing, the sort of work that media analysts and media critics do. And Shakespeare's doing something similar in The Winter's Tale around the figure of Autolycus, who is, he's out in the countries, but he's really a figure lifted right off the streets of early modern London, right? He's a balladeer, and sort of one of these wandering salesmen who's singing these ballads with a topical hook in them, and is very, very much a figure of the emergent news industry. And I also look at one of my favorite plays, Middleton's A Game at Chess, and how Middleton is, that's a little bit later on. That's 1623, when the Butter news books are coming out, and print is, the news industry is really starting to come into shape by that point, where you've got not just sort of intermittent publication, but really these pamphlets are numbered, they're serialized, they're coming out regularly, once a week, and it's really is becoming a profession. They're not calling it journalism yet, but really is becoming a serious established business. And Middleton, again, is a great sort of media theorist, media analyst, and poking fun at news and satirizing it, but also doing some really deep thinking, and also some serious thinking about conversion too, although I don't talk, and topical controversy.
Well, this news is the kind of thing that converts people, and of course, this sounds what is the it sounds boomer-ish of me to say, but the social media phenomenon that we've had over the past few years, where things have sort of blown up, and there's been a lot of discomfort in this. Is not new in the sense that fake news is not new. Sensational news is not new. There's nothing. As soon as you have the way to, I'm sure the town crier, before there was movable movable type. There has always been this kind of spurious nature to the news, because you want to draw attention.
Always.
And you learn very quickly that the bigger the story is, Goliath has to be huge in order for the story to work with David, right? We don't want two warriors of similar sizes, just as better. It's a better story Goliath just keeps getting bigger and bigger, perhaps, right? So this is
fake news. I think even it's possible to say that fake news maybe predates what we think of as "quote unquote" authentic or real news.
Of course, gossip.
It's always been there, and certainly that's a big part of what's going on with the spurious news stories that Autolycus is talking about in The Winter's Tale. Singing fish and all that sort of thing, and the spurious news stories that Jonson is presenting and making fun of in The Staple of News too. So a lot of these documents begin a true report of, or
Oh,
the true
yes.
story of, or that they're really trying to emphasize truth. And when that discourse gets moved into a theatrical register, sort of turns the lights onto questions of, well, what really does truth mean here? How, how are these sorts of stories working to sort of present themselves as true?
Yeah, and that ties in the whole notion of conversion with the fear that these Protestant Puritan ministers in the 16th century had of not fear, their contempt for the theater and its conversional ability, that people are changed very quickly. And I know you and I both worry about this in terms of social media and how quickly someone can be led into a way of believing an entire way of looking at the world that might not be the most that can create the kinds of turmoil that we've had recently and globally, really in the political in various political theaters, where people just come in believing one thing. Um, and I remember when the Coen brothers Fargo came out in the 90s, and at
Oh,
the
cool.
beginning
Yeah,
of the
me too.
movie, it's completely ironic. This is a true story, right? And they
Hmm.
expected to, of course, their intelligent viewers to realize they are just doing a play on the true story thing there with the,
Right.
and they are drawing from a kind of story that happened, but I believed it. I
Yeah.
believed it for years until I looked back and I'm going, oh, they were just pulling my chain there.
Hmm.
But we do this too, and that's been the
Yeah.
scariest part of the past. I would say 5, 6, 7 years is that I found myself moving over in an opinion and then going and looking at it, and it could be left or right or here or there, and then going, wait a second, I was pulled over. I was in the process of conversion from one frame of mind to the other. It can be scary. It can be a bit
Hmm.
scary.
Yes,
Uh,
indeed. Indeed.
but then I guess that's our job. We're supposed to be kind of the educators and part of the control mechanism. So, uh, you know, uh,
Right. Well, the antidote to the problem, I think, is read critical thinking skills and read.
just keep reading. That's it. That's it. Uh,
There's no way, that's how you build those muscles to be able to differentiate between spurious information and begin to recognize rhetorical patterns and build up that skill set is to read lots of doing, and I mean consume other sorts of media. I think social media is especially pernicious to things like Twitter, where part of the whole attraction is you don't actually have to read that much. You just get the little however many characters that give you a little shot of endorphins and make you angry, and then it's on to the next thing, right?
yeah.
But skills of serious concentration and really sort of an ability to understand the rhetorical effects of texts, that's how you solve that problem.
Yeah. You need context, text and
Yeah,
context, and much broader thing. That is, and this is a kind of spurious news on steroids because of the way it can spread so quickly to so many areas. But
yeah.
that's a topic for well, that's been a big topic in podcasting and in media for some time now, and it will remain so as long as it
Yeah.
kind of remains a problem. I do
Yeah,
think though that
we'll see where we are 150 years from now, or
that's
well, we
right.
won't, but
Somebody will.
I'm always an optimist about these things.
I
I take I always like to remember Socrates, saying these new things, books, this is going to be the destruction of human
It's just
civilization.
going to do.
People don't really memorize things or have things in their head anymore. Now it's just really your brain is on a page, and you're just using this as a crutch, and nobody's ever going to be able to really think anymore.
Yeah,
And in a way, he was right. It did destroy the old order,
Yeah.
but it also established this whole new order in a
It
way
did.
that
It
he
did.
could have never anticipated.
Yeah.
So maybe, we're in a similar sort of transition to
Yeah.
another paradigm for thinking seriously. But
Yeah.
if that's true, we're really at the dangerous baby step stage where you've got a toddler walking around with a machine gun and could go off at
Yes,
any minute,
it
right?
really is that. Yeah, and I really do place faith on the public because of several examples. Well, Orson Welles reading H.G. Wells, War of the Worlds, and this hysteria over the radio that broke out.
Mhm.
There are these moments where the public becomes educated, and I think I have
Yeah.
read where during the Soviet period, when there was so much state control over the press, you had a large portion of the population that was accustomed to knowing that you had to hedge what you were reading in the paper. That they became educated in knowing that they were in a propagandistic system. Now that's a very
Yeah.
stable state media. Now in social media, it's not a stable state-owned thing. Some people might argue it is, but I don't think so.
Hmm.
And so, but I think that, and I think I'm seeing it now. I think already we're seeing people are understand that not every meme that they see on their smartphone or whatnot, or on their computer, that those can be spurious. They're becoming better able to read that and to tell their
Oh yeah.
friends.
Oh yeah, definitely. There is
Yeah,
a whole new form of literacy in the digital age and the age of social media, for sure. I know because I have two kids, 14 and 11, and they are able to read and recognize things with a high degree of discrimination,
yeah,
within those contexts that would totally fly over my head. It's really a whole new language
yeah,
just developing.
yeah.
And
Oh, that's so good to hear. My
mhm,
kids are adults now, but that's so good to hear, because I
mhm.
remember when we were 13 years old, we heard that Michael Jackson had died from an acid overdose, and we
Right.
just believed that until we saw him again. It says, well, apparently he's not dead yet.
Right.
But those things just got crazy kinds of urban myths and so forth that now can be researched very quickly,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So it might. I like let's end on an optimistic note, because
All right, good. That's
really the
in
ability to,
character for me. I'm
well,
always an optimist. A cautious optimism is my credo. That I'll put that on my gravestone.
this is great, Stephen. Well, if I could ask you to stay a moment after we finish recording, and
Sure.
again, thanks from Tokyo, from all of us over here, and our international audience. Thank you so much. This is your Friday night, and we've talked to your supper. You're probably hungry now, and thank you
Okay.
so much for sharing your work with us today.
My pleasure. It has been a joy. Thank you, Thomas.